Hello, YouTube and BitChute friends. I'd like to I'd like to synopsize a little bit on the beer virus, the COVID shit show, the Corona beer virus shit show. I'd like to synopsize and don't think this is particularly original, but I'm going to formulate some thoughts and kind of embrace, it's the best way I can put it, the mystery that we are a part of without the usual antagonism that goes along with understanding certain things. Obviously, there is a natural response of anger when we are confronted with adversaries who have no compassion, no empathy or sympathy for anything other than being themselves, selfish, or whatever that might be. People have, I call them people because I don't think they're aliens or some other entity from another dimension. These are of us. And it's important, I think, for people that appreciate some of my insights or thoughts or opinions to understand that I come from a place as a painter, an artist who makes paintings and sculpture, and they're basically like the images that I produce, that what is a result of my effort, are kind of like the tip of something. I hope to be able to articulate something of this mystery. Whenever I engage in making a painting, there is a fundamental commitment to communicating that my feelings about the deep sense of belonging I have being part of this mystery. Me, and the mystery is something that is obviously, it's a mystery. It's we can't understand it with our brain for whatever reason, but we can probably understand some aspects of it through things that have been given to us, like intuition, and I'm a big fan of conscience. Conscience is another one of these mysterious aspects of our nature that usually trumps our mental, intellectual commitments. It usually trumps. We can't excuse away things that are wrong because we have this innate quality within us. Everybody has it. Even psychopaths know when they're doing wrong. Some say, well, they just don't want to be caught. So it looks like, I think even psychopaths understand when they're wrong. They're hiding away under rocks, not to be exposed by the light. And it's not just because, oh, we don't want to be caught, but they know it's wrong. That's what I think. I may be wrong about that. Psychopaths may have no connection to the mystery in terms of this conscience thing. But I'm going to propose some my conclusions about the shit show, the COVID fabricated shit show, and what I think has happened through some of the presenters I've listened to in the last couple of years, people who are considered to be doctors and scientists who understand the nature of the mechanical universe. They don't have much of an understanding of this mystical part in us. Mystical being, maybe mystical comes from mystery. Does it? I think so. There's a mystical version of us unfolding every day. And these people are, when I say science and doctors and all that kind of stuff, they're more on the kind of pragmatic or intellectual mind mental side of things rather than although they have soul and spirit and conviction, and their conscience comes out and all of that stuff, and they try to explain it within their framework of expertise. And what I've gathered from a lot of these people is that the uh, this event the last 3 years, what has happened, and people insisting that it was a pandemic, plays into a story and a narrative that was created in order to captivate and capture a population worldwide, and to propagate an idea that there was some vicious, lethal thing going around everywhere, mysteriously, all of a sudden appearing everywhere within days. The entire earth was overcome by this viciousness. And what happened, what appears to be in the language quite often, is that there were experiments, which I believe are true. Experiments are going on all the time with the mucky mucks. They're always mucking with nature and the mystery, trying to manipulate the mystery in a way that benefits a small group of people who enjoy the suffering of others. This is the root, as far as I'm concerned. It's not money, it's not power. There is power for people. The power that people feel is in the suffering of others. So quite often you hear people talk about when they're being abused, and let's say you're confronted by a bully, you don't go, you're not afraid of it, you're not intimidated by it. This is extremely irritating to the bully and people who are attempting to enforce their retarded life view on anyone. By not being captured by that is extremely frustrating for the individuals attempting to undermine us. And the essence of the exercise, I believe, is to create suffering, and suffering gives great satisfaction. Why would there be, when you think about the archetypal example of creating suffering in order to extract, for example, vital information, it has been shown to be completely of no value and use, because people, when they are in pain and hurt, they'll say anything in order to please their captors and their abusers. So the idea, this, and in essence, Guantanamo Bay and the rendition camps that the most successful nation since the Romans on earth, even more than the Brits probably, because the extent of the empire, the U.S. empire, is, I would imagine, through corporate um, the coexistence of corporation and the state together, have captured and controlled and overcome probably 9/10 of the earth as we understand it. I don't know the Roman Empire, how extensive it was, or the British Empire. I think the U.S. empire has far exceeded that. And they have rendition camps where they find people who enjoy creating the suffering. But my feeling is it extends across a base of these degenerates. The degenerates, as Cliff High likes to call them, the Khazarian mafia, whoever they might be. He has some specific place where they operate, and they're kind of an amorphous bunch who don't have any affiliations, as I say, other than creating suffering. So I'll keep this fairly short. Here's my thought on the shit show, the garbage that we were fed, the illnesses and deaths by this vicious virus, supposedly. There were, in fact, as has come out, the gain of function idea that has been talked about with the wizard, the ignorant wizard called Fauci, who propagated the media event, or who spearheaded and was the front man for the media on this story, uh, pretending to hide the fact that there were lab experiments with different things. And I have no doubt these labs, these mucky fucks who manipulate nature, can come up with some very ugly chemicals and possibly even life forms, although I think a virus outside of a host does not live. So basically, we're dealing with some chemical, as far as I understand it, that is being developed, just like mustard gas in the First World War. And we saw how that went. People suffered terribly and died terribly in the trenches, and even their own. I mean, the wind would blow back and they would die a miserable death from this chemical. And this is something that is obviously Agent Orange in Vietnam. Their own people, the vets, were terribly afflicted by the use of this stuff. They sprayed it on their own people. They have no regard. The authorities that carry these things out, and I don't think, I'm not even just thinking low level authorities, sergeants, captains, probably even lieutenants in the Army, uh, they, I think, sometimes refuse to follow orders. As you get higher up, I think that in that higher than lieutenant area, everybody follows the higher up stuff. There is no conscience functioning visibly among the higher echelon. You know, the Patton types and the Eisenhowers and the big brass. They have their orders from much higher places, and they tend. I don't think they actually have any kind of resistance to those directives. It just gets propagated as we get lower down the food chain. Quite often, I think people look at what they're supposed to do and say, no, I'm not going to spray this shit over people, you know, and then they get turfed. So um, anyway, that's a whole other thing about how this whole echelon of compliance works down through the lowest ranks. I think the upper ranks always follow orders. The lower ranks, maybe there is some resistance. So on this period of shit show, the 3 years, I believe those responsible for propagating this story actually believed that they had discovered, had created a really nasty somethingness. And that nasty somethingness was going to decimate the population like a mustard gas idea, like a chemical that anthrax or whatever they have developed, designed, whatever that might be, would devastate the population. And they preempted any devastation with the lockdowns, with the masks, with the idea of we need to inject, with all the kind of phony tests you can do, like the PCR test proven not to show anything. You can find cucumber DNA in monkeys if you have the test, if you amplify it enough. You can find anything you want to find, as its inventor, Carrie Mullis, explained. So my thought here is that there actually was something they thought they had developed or invented to release onto the population in order to create suffering. This is the bottom line among these elites, because they have all the money they could possibly ever want or need. Money is not an issue. Power, to the extent that it aids them feeling satisfaction in the suffering of others. That's what I think. So this has been rolled out with the side benefits of giving even more control of a very docile, manipulated population. This is something I can't argue. I think as a whole, we are somewhat of it's an unpleasant analogy, but the herd idea really does fit. It does happen. And I've experienced myself, I become overwhelmed by circumstances, and I have responses, knee-jerk responses when I'm afraid, the flight and fright kind of idea. It does happen. This is something that we need to use our, not just our intuition here, but our mind to overcome the influences from outside that make us do things we know are not right, but we do them anyway. The herd thing truly exists. So what they figured, what this uh, mafia, this cartel, this mystery retarded bunch propagate, came out of a conviction that they discovered something. So they initiated the program, like that 201 conference with the Gates character, who's a front man as well. He's not instrumental in anything. He's just, people are rich not because they're smart, but because they are propagated. So Gates is one of the choices, and the Soros and what's that Buffett guy. They have their money not because they are so incredibly brilliant, but they are able to comply with the highest orders and never question. So they get as we would say, as materialists, they have been gifted something, but they have to produce certain things. Like Gates has to produce this. He has to step in front of the screen. He has to appear on the screen and pretend that he knows something, and but he's just regurgitating the shit he's told to tell us, right? Not instrumental whatsoever. He may appear to be in control, but he's not. That's my opinion. So they rolled out this plan without actually having the actual death counts that they were depending on. So they created fictitious and phony videos of people dropping dead in the street in the very beginning. I remember seeing in Chinese video, and this is interesting too. There is no border when it comes to this retarded, degenerate mystery cartel. I mean, they're part of the mystery too, but they're twisted. It's kind of like something went wrong along the line, and they turned wonky somehow, and interpret the mystery just for themselves rather than being part of it. They want to dominate and control it. So these events early on, when they realized there was no vicious thing killing people, they had to make stories that appeared to be uh, confirming the thing that they had put out there already through communication channels, media channels, all that. Okay, so they propagated this story and they didn't have anything to back it up. So the big effort in this bullshit pandemic thing was to create scenarios that could be sold to the herd. Hospitals were full. And it turns out that hospitals have always been full. When I've had to go to an emergency thing, I had to wait 2-3 hours minimum to get looked at. So there was always this backlog. It's always been there. But now the backlog was shifted to fit the narrative, the story that was created, because they didn't get the results out of whatever they designed, whatever they released. Scary too, because is it possible for them to release something? Personally, I don't think so. Not on a planetary basis, not on a worldwide basis, because the delivery system, they're not very sophisticated. They may have machines and things that look very sophisticated and high end, like AI. AI, that's a real joke. AI making paintings and writing stories and making poems. I mean, it's such regurgitated shit. It's so obvious. I think I might actually talk about AI and regurgitations, and there's a difference between regurgitating and taking something that you're influenced by and altering it in certain ways. There's a big difference. That AI has no ability, as far as I can tell, to come up with anything original. AI reconfigures shit, and it's stupid. It's totally stupid when you look at the bottom of it. So anyway, this my synopsis of this shit show, this garbage that was propagated, escalated as it appeared clear as to people like myself. Within a week or two of, I realized this was all it's a big hoax, it's hooey, that they needed to escalate the story part of it, because the physical thing they thought they had mastered in releasing on the population didn't pan out. Not to say there couldn't be a nasty version of something in the future that will threaten, like I say, the Agent Orange or the mustard gas idea. But the delivery system would have to be ubiquitous. Like possibly, it's possible that the lines they spray could literally be agents that have been developed, which are, I mean, it's being sprayed for whatever reason. People really don't know. My suspicion is it saturates the atmosphere, and it could possibly, uh, I don't know where I heard this, but it's possible to project holographic images in order to, have a movie going on in the sky. You could literally see something that looks like, how people think that those Disney movies seem real in some way, that people could be fooled to see these jerky kind of uh, supposedly advanced filmmaking where they don't use people, but they have cartoon versions and it looks real, but it's not. So maybe they're getting us set up for something in the sky. Anyway, they came up with something that didn't pan out, They created a story around it, and when they realized it wasn't doing what they wanted, people weren't dropping in the streets, they continued it anyway because it was an extremely successful operation. This PSYOP was extremely successful, and it has encouraged them, I believe, to produce the next wave, whether it's in a year or 5 or 10 years. It has actually given a lot of credibility to continuing a program. I said before, I think many people have also said this was a precursor to when they perfect the next stage of being able to control the population who have rejected conscience. I harp on this. It's so incredibly important. You cannot control your fear mechanisms, but you allow your conscience to function. It will supersede all that ultimately, eventually. There may be that response, that fear thing that happens, but a conscience will always supersede because it's the highest aspect of our humanness. And conscience leads toward that manifestation that a lot of people, including myself, attach themselves to, which is that love principle, that caring love principle, comes out of conscience. That's how I have basically reduced it. You don't get love and caring without a conscience. You got to have a conscience first. That's my opinion. So in summation, that's my conclusion about the shit show for people who have followed the different people, and you can analyze everything and you can dissect everything and you can come to a conclusion about how this all has been propagated. The fundamental notion for me is that they failed in producing the thing that was supposed to kill everybody. They had this hubris that their great science and manipulation could actually kill most of the population, or at least simulate some sort of a kill that people would fall for. Eventually it failed because here we are. There are still people wearing masks, these poor psyches, they're walking around pretending that there is a vicious something that you can catch. And that goes along with other videos I've done on infectious germ theory. I am convinced 100% we don't get infected by anything. It's an internal development, something that happens within us that is out of whack. Doesn't mean we don't get toxic. How does toxicity build up and then appear like, hey, what the hell? Oh, a squirrel came into my studio. Hey, bugger off. No, this is no home for you. Go away. Go away. A baby squirrel came up the stairs, climbed 50 stairs to come in. Don't want him gnawing on my paintings. Better keep him out. So, yeah, the propagation of this was ultimately, it's never a mistake. Don't let a crisis go to waste idea. So you manage to think, or this mafia bunch believed that they had the thing that would literally affect a large portion of the population. It never happened. The mortality rate was less than 1 point some percent for this thing. There are many other afflictions that we have that have a much greater mortality, and there is no pandemic. They don't declare a pandemic on other things that have a much higher mortality rate, but they did on this, precisely to propagate a planned psychological operation that would subjugate the population. This seems very clear to me, and I think a lot of other people have commented on this. And my point today is that they actually thought they'd come up with something, and they didn't. Doesn't mean they won't come up with something really nasty. Still, they know how to manipulate chemicals and elements that hurt us passively and very aggressively. I mean, the food chain that is the things that people eat generally have been saturated with all these nasty things, from saccharins to the sugars, even natural products like sugar is one of the worst in terms of our health. That as we're still younger with less toxicity, sugar seems to be able to be metabolized. But as we become older and more toxic even, then this becomes a very lethal. It's like an atom bomb going off inside us. So I suggest avoiding all things that form or create sugars. With the exception of fruit, I think it's a different type of sugar, although not entirely not a culprit. There is possibly some issues with that. Honey escapes some of that event horizon of sugarness. Um, anyway, these are elements. Those are natural elements in the food chain, but I'm talking about all the preservatives and all the things that have been added to processed foods that are obviously extremely, extremely difficult to metabolize, and they accumulate over time and then wreak havoc as we get older. And even not so old, some bodies are more susceptible than others. So my point about I'll just repeat briefly about the infectious germ theory. I don't they call it a theory because it hasn't been proven, obviously. You don't have the word theory after a proposal without it being unproven. They've never replicated infection in an independent lab test. So it's the same as gravity is a theory because they've never been able to replicate this in a lab test. Unfortunately, they have to deal with science from the point of view that integral science requires to be able to reproduce something that you propose needs to be proven in some kind of lab experiment, and they haven't been able to do it, which is why it's called a theory. So infectious germ theory, and as far as I'm concerned, is a proposal. You can believe it or not, but belief is not science. So I'm saying no, I don't believe it. I think there are other factors, and I think toxicity is the more likely culprit, even when you have a person with a cold around you and then you catch a cold. It doesn't work that way. I don't know the mechanisms of transference, if there is such a thing, but I am not of the opinion that you get some lethal element passed on from the mucus of someone else that enters your body, because they've done experiments on infectious germ theory and introduced people who have vicious flu symptoms and colds, and they directly put the serum, the mucus serum, into another, and nothing happens. The body just rejects it, and maybe some bodies are more resilient than others, but the infectious germ theory should function on every level, but it hasn't been reproduced. So this entire shit show narrative was so obviously flawed because they didn't get the results. The mafia, this shit show mafia, didn't get the results, but they wouldn't give up on the story they'd created before it even had. Early on, I think they knew they couldn't pull it off. They couldn't pull off the massive deaths and all that. And I'm not saying people didn't die. They didn't die of what they said we died of. That's what I'm saying. So anyway, it opens up the door because the docile population, and I'm not saying this with any anger toward anyone, because I quite often find it irritating when the alternatives and people who get angry about this. It's no way to counter. Our deepest inner self does not function on anger. It functions on the principle of appreciation and the idea that even when suffering does occur, we somehow are still able to overcome. Like those people that you hear about that are extremely you hear about people that are able to endure extreme extremities to such an extent. It's phenomenal uh, how the human spirit is resilient, and I think this resilience, the way I observe this, needs to be recreated even in circumstances that are not threatening, totally threatening or horrible. We practice this every day. We become more adept uh, at being part of this mystery without resorting to the blame and the anger. Doesn't mean those bastards aren't out there, yes, but our response needs to be mindful and anyway, yeah, I think I'll leave it here. I could go on. I love talking about stuff that refers to the mystery and uh, that which I'm a part of. I'm so grateful for having been, to the extent that I have understood this. And it's not like a finished, oh, I've understood it, goodbye, I leave. This is like an ongoing thing that I'm coming to in some form in my life every day, which is really it's wonderful. So yeah, even this lesson, this shit show, has really helped me understand something more deeply about myself. And like the bastards say, don't let a crisis go to waste. Good crisis, the same thing for people of conscience. Don't let this crisis go to waste. Incorporate and understand in some version, and inculcate ourselves even deeper into this magnificent mystery. That's the mistake the bastards make. They think they can manipulate on all levels, but they can't when it gets down to this essential aspect of our higher self. They have no access to this higher self. That what I call the higher self, what some religions call soul and spirit, I would refer to as the higher self. So embrace your higher self. Embrace your higher self. My message, the shit show was helped us to embrace our higher self. That's what I say. So my conclusion on the shit show.